All right. So let's say instead of saying hello world, or in addition to saying hello world, we also want a button. Okay. And so this is like the code we wrote together earlier in the unit, but now we're going to do it in our Node application. So there's a couple more steps that are required. Um, let's start within our index.ejs file and then work our way backwards to actually make this work. So instead of hello world, let's add a button. Let me commit these changes first. So there we go. Add initial EJS files. All right. So now we're going to get rid of hello world and we're going to add a button. So we're going to use the button tag. And we're going to specify a class of our button because we're going to use this for both styling and behavior. So I'm going to call this class create entry. And then the name of our button will be create entry. I have an extra 10. There we go. So now on our website, we should have just a button, and the button's name should be create entry. However, we want this styled appropriately. And eventually we want to be able to attach a JavaScript handler to it, and all that other good stuff. So let's look at what's required for that. If we look inside this assets folder, we can see that there's 3 subfolders. There's a CSS subfolder, an image subfolder, and a JavaScript subfolder. Let's look at the CSS one first. I gave you, for us to get started, a couple different CSS files. One is called styles.css. And this is styling for the authentication page that we're going to write later. The other one is called Pico Mini, which is, no, I didn't write this, to be clear. Like, this is a mess. But, well, it's not meant for people to read. This is a styling framework that makes things look nice without us having to write all the CSS code ourselves. So this is going to make our button look a little bit nicer. We just want to make sure these things get included correctly. So if we look at our header, we can see that our header is including both of these style sheets. Okay. So let's see what this looks like. So I'm going to go back and stop this and run this again. And we're going to look at our button. There's the button, create entry. It is a button. It's showing up on the web page. It doesn't look particularly styled though. Okay. And in fact, if you look in your console in your browser, you will see that we have some errors on this page. Okay. We have errors that are saying it can't load the CSS files. So let's fix that. The reason why it can't load the CSS files is because inside of the header, when we have this href to this particular endpoint, our Node application doesn't know how to deal with /CSS/styles. In fact, the only thing our Node application can deal with right now is just the endpoint /. So everything else is just an error. So we're not actually loading these files. We don't want to write routes for the CSS files. They're just CSS files. We just want them to be included just like they would normally be. And so we just have to tell our Node application that, hey, there are just some resources that are like static resources. They're just in these folders. And when you're asked to load them, here's where you find them. So let's do that together. So let's go back to server.javascript. And after we set our view engine, we then are going to load what are called our assets. Our assets are static things like style sheets, images, client-side JavaScript code. We keep all of them in a folder called assets. You may remember from a couple days ago, this was all annotated with like, hey, this is all the stuff that lives in the client. We just need to tell our Express application, hey, we're going to add some middleware. So app.use, if you are told to look for something that starts with /CSS, you find it inside of a static resource, so express.static, and it's inside the assets folder in a folder called CSS. So this single line of code says any request for something that starts /CSS, which is exactly what we're doing here and here. Anything that starts /CSS, it's a static resource. You're going to find it in a folder called assets inside of a folder, and inside of that, a folder called CSS. And we're going to write this similar line of codes 3 times for each of our 3 types of static resources. We're going to do the same thing for /img. And we're going to do the same thing for /JavaScript. These 3 lines of code are some of the most common 3 lines of code I personally forget. And then I don't understand why none of my JavaScript on the client is working, and why none of my images are loading, and why none of my style sheets are being applied, because I forget this to insert this middleware for my static resources. Let's just take a quick look, because I know we're almost out of time, then we'll definitely do question stuff. Let's run this one more time, and I'll refresh my page one more time. And now I have a super fancy, really large blue button. But my style sheet is being applied. This is great. The button doesn't do anything yet when I click on it, but at least I have a cool blue button.